Honey, look at those beautiful clouds.
Those aren't clouds, Daddy. Those are chemtrails.
Chemtrails? What are chemtrails?
Chemical trails, Daddy, and they're very bad.
Hello, this is Dane Wigington with GeoEngineering Watch Radio for another week of trying to assess our common dilemma. Forgive my voice. Spent a little bit too much time out in the woods one afternoon inhaling whatever they're spraying. It has invaded my throat and sinuses, so trying to work that all out. I normally train inside and try to stay out of the spray, but that's how bad it is in some places right now. Seems that a lot of people are getting sick. But as we head into yet another week of yet another engineered snowstorm, this one is Winter Storm Titan. Of course, the theatrical names to add to the theater. I know it sounds like a broken record. Every week we talk about the engineered snowstorms because every week they engineer another one. The difference with this storm is they allowed a fairly powerful low pressure to spin up off the west coast, and they allowed that to come in so that they could calm the fears about the absolutely unprecedented drought in California. Completely unprecedented. In fact, the term being used by many meteorologists is the ridiculous ridge of high pressure. This is something that has not been seen anywhere previously in this manner, and that normally any sort of quote-unquote natural drought, which we don't know what would be natural, even if we look back 6 decades plus. We know they've been hampering the weather systems that long. But any sort of quote-unquote natural drought onset happens over a period of several years, but not this complete shutting of the flow with this HARP-manipulated high-pressure ridge. So, but some rain did come into California, but at least not in the locations in Northern California nearly as much as the Weather Channel would have us believe. And I think certainly the drought was so glaringly wrong, it was so unprecedented that they simply turned the tap on for a while to calm people's fears. But again, in Northern California, which is where the rain comes from, for Southern California, not much rain has fallen. Again, we're 200 plus inches of rain short for the last 7 years. So this last round of storms that they said would bring, 4 or 5 inches, I believe we got 1. And they aerosolized a ton of moisture right over the top of us. It's visible on satellite radar. You can hear the aircraft outside. Featureless skies are very telltale of a lot of aerosolization where you can't make out any individual cloud formation. So you have featureless skies, and you have sometimes at best a uniform, very rapid drizzle, and that's indicative of particulates being mixed into that precipitation because it dictates the droplet size. So if you look out over a puddle and you see a very uniform rapid drizzle, that's generally indicative of aerosols coming down in that rain. You can pH test that with litmus paper, and if you're in the 6.5, 6.6 range, you can bet there's a lot of metal in that rain. So that's what we see. So now they let this happen. They're flowing moisture for, quote, Winter Storm Titan in from the west, and they try to broadcast that moisture over the widest possible area. Again, people need to understand the full goal of the weather mod programs is to try to cover as much real estate as they can. And I'm not saying this is the only goal. I mean, clearly we have too many things to go over at any one time, and leading as far down the ladder as eugenics, which I believe to be a part of these programs as well. But they try to cover as much real estate as they can. So rain that would have fallen in California, perhaps 4 or 5 inches of rain in Northern California, ends up being a largely rainless sky of toxic aerosols and migrated moisture that might cover 6, 8, 10 states of this canopy. So right now, temperatures in a lot of areas are escalating rapidly. Looking at news from the Arctic as of yesterday, very, very dire news on the methane releasing. And the weather makers have clouded this issue continuously by this train of engineered snowstorms. And I encourage people to watch Weather Channel just to see how ridiculous it is. And we'll be posting another piece on this from a very credible group probably tomorrow on the Weather Channel Theater and their task of clouding reality with their theater. So they try to portray the frozen earth thing and yet trying to explain how, again, storms have a warm side and a cold side. So yet this storm, like so many others, has moisture pumping not just from the Pacific in, but also from the Gulf of Mexico, again, pumping warm subtropical moisture. And you'll have a large transition zone of ice storm, which is now every single storm. Snow doesn't have anything to do with elevation anymore. People should think about this. Snow used to be related to elevation. Why isn't it related to elevation anymore? Because the atmosphere is stratifying. That means it's building in layers. The layers are not mixing. The ocean is doing the same. And geoengineering is atmospherically the most key factor in this stratification. So you have this cold layer on the ground that is largely a result of the geoengineering. And this nucleated material, as they're spraying these storms and this moisture from the Gulf, it causes a transition zone of ice storm on every storm. And you don't have, again, snow doesn't relate to elevation anymore. You're either on the snowy side of the storm or the severe side of the storm. And these are completely unprecedented weather systems. So, and you always have this big ice storm transition area in between. So the job of the Weather Channel meteorologist is to make the totally unnatural seem natural. We had clouds this week in Georgia, undulatus asperatus. That's a cloud that was only identified in 2009. And those clouds are connected to, again, the stratified atmosphere, very cold layer on the ground, much warmer layer above. So, again, anybody who thinks that they would not have seen such striking clouds anywhere in the past, if they existed anywhere in the past, which they didn't, then people aren't really stopping to think. I mean, what they're doing to the atmosphere is so cataclysmic that we are seeing things that should shock people. And disappointingly, many people are not shocked enough yet because they're going about their life as if nothing's wrong. Now we have Project Lucy and Project Alamo probably well underway, which are two projects to try to nuke the methane in the atmosphere with opposing frequencies from ionosphere heaters like HAARP. No known information on the consequences of this. I mean, we can only guess at what it's doing to the atmosphere. But this is how desperate they are, and a lot of noctilucent clouds are being seen, as some callers have alluded to. So it appears they're just engaging in one act of total desperation after another. And now, let's go to the Ukraine, where, and this is connected, again, as we've mentioned in the past, with the weather mod, with the walls closing in, with people waking up, The power structure becomes more desperate, more dangerous. And what we see in Ukraine is shocking to me, and what we see on our mainstream media is even more shocking. It is such utter and total propaganda what's being spun about Ukraine and how they point the finger at Russia, for example, for somehow causing what's happening there now. Russia's moving troops in, by the way, into Ukraine. And frankly, who can blame them? Given the circumstances we have, it would be like Putin and perhaps Castro, if he was still around, or some other South American leaders coming here, funding the Wall Street protesters, giving them arms, and helping them topple their government. What would our government do? What would our people do? They would react very immediately to such an intrusion. It's exactly what's happening in Ukraine. We have Libya. How many countries will our government help to topple while the American people stands by and pretends nothing's going on? I'm astounded at this. And even, again, the epitome of American people's ambivalence is the fact that they can see this stuff happening in the sky above them, see their health deteriorating, see their family's health deteriorating, see their environment deteriorating, see their weather deteriorating, and yet remain completely ambivalent. But I want to focus right now a little bit on the Ukraine situation, because I believe the power structure, as people wake up to the weather mod and so forth, and the fact that they've been poisoned and sprayed, power structure is going to do something. And I think right now we might be seeing that starting to unfold in Ukraine. We'll have to see how it plays out. But there are troops moving into Ukraine right now, Russian troops. This is a situation that could get very tense very fast. And we know the economic system is about to implode. Russ, have you, I'll have to give the mic to you here because I'll get my voice back, but have you seen the news that the Russian troops are moving into Ukraine right now?
Yeah, I've heard about that, Dane.
What's your thoughts?
Well, I think you're right. I think it's very typical that Russia is going to react to that. I think you're on target with all that. Who knows what this is going to lead up to, but I think we're seeing the beginning of much larger things unfold. But I think, what about you, Richard?
We have a little bit of audio trouble, Russ, too. I just want to mention. I'm not sure if that's getting across to you. It's just kind of breaking up a little bit.
Okay. Richard, can you hear us?
Yeah, again, you were breaking up just a little bit. Am I coming through all right?
Yeah, you're coming through good. You're a little bit of feedback's coming through your mic. That's all.
I hear Richard good, but I don't hear you good, Russ. I just hear Richard good.
So anyway, I think I agree also with what Dane was saying. I think the U.S. for some time the U.S. government, in cooperation with bosses that are not national, that are far above the visible U.S. government, are moving into other countries and have been instrumental in overthrowing both dictators and reasonably elected leaders all over the world. And I think that continues. And as long as they feel that the American public is pretty much completely unaware of what's going on both in their country and in the world, that they'll just keep on accelerating that. And I do expect a lot of distracting events to come up, not just overseas, but probably in this country too, as far as more false flag events like Sandy Hook and the Boston bombing and things like that, and probably on a larger scale, unfortunately, I would expect. And
hey, Richard, let me comment on what you just said, and then you continue, because I totally agree with you.
Sure.
It's profound how anytime there's too much attention starting to arise on an important issue, there's always an event that happens. Yes?
Yeah, and I think right now it's on a lot of issues, and I think they're monitoring very closely their biggest fear, which is a general increase in consciousness and awareness in the public. And that's why they've worked so hard to prevent that through psychological and physical means at the same time. And right now the big problem is that in spite of all those attacks from every direction on the American public's ability to perceive what's going on, people seem irritatingly more awake, more, beginning to be aware, at least in small numbers, of what's going on. They're showing actual video footage of false flag events like the Boston bombing being committed in real time. And this must be incredibly frustrating to the rulers just trying to carry out their smooth false flag agendas to keep people's attention distracted. So they've got to do bigger ones. And I think, that I'm sure it's just a matter of choosing which one they want to let loose right now.
Yeah, I think it is. And even with what's happening in Ukraine right now, the perception of the average American is they have been fed complete propaganda from mainstream media. It's probably astoundingly off base from the actual events there. And what I heard CNN yesterday referring to how Russia aggressively invaded Georgia some years past, and if anybody really knew what happened in that event, that was not the case. And I'm not defending Russia in some of their actions in the past. Certainly we know they had their own Afghanistan and so forth, but the Georgia situation was also completely spun. That was Georgia that fired the first shots and caused that aggression. Russia simply responded. So if we stand back, let's take Iran for an example. We hear this constant banging of the drum with Iran and what a threat they pose. Let's look at history. In the last 200 and I believe 30 years, Iran has invaded exactly no one. In the last 50 years, the U.S. has invaded over 50 countries. Who's the aggressor?
Yeah, what's really amazing is that people think in that case, well, obviously Iran is the aggressor because the television says so.
Exactly, and with no knowledge of actual fact, actual history, people simply accept what they're spoon-fed. And I hope that there'll be some sort of awakening, but even with people I know have tried to mail out accurate data and sources for information, and they seem to be more concerned about their golf game, which is astounding to me. And I don't know where personal honor has gone, any sense of responsibility toward the whole. And
I also want to add, Dane, in response to your point on Iran, I happen to have had a good friend here all morning from Iran, and he brought over a bunch of pictures that a friend of his had taken just in the last few days in Iran of the countryside and the people there and normal life, and they're just like really good people anywhere else. I mean, if this kind of thing were known and people realized that all the major media is just completely lying about everything, there couldn't be any wars, at least not any that the people supported, and you wouldn't hear people on television chanting in crowds, USA, USA, as people are murdered en masse. It wouldn't happen. So it's really important, just like in World War II, where the Japanese were portrayed as complete demonic entities that weren't even human. In every case, and it's happening with Iran now, and it would with any of the next intended victims, that we're supposed to see that they're really not people, so it's fine if they're all killed. I mean, it's just the fact that humanity can fall for that is not a very good commentary on the level of consciousness right now.
It's not, and I remember when 9/11 happened, the same day, there was a few guys that I connected with that day, and their response was, we need to go over there and nuke that whole region. And my reply to them was, if Jeffrey McVeigh, and I don't think he was responsible for the Oklahoma City bombings either. I think that that's pretty clear at this point. But just for this conversation, let's say that he was. He was from Kingman, Arizona. So because McVeigh was from Kingman, and even if we were to believe the official narrative on 9/11, which obviously I don't, but for the sake of the conversation, do we nuke a whole region where someone might have been from, who might have been responsible for something? What kind of mentality is that?
Well, according to the United Nations, it probably would be a good idea, Dane, because we have 20 times too many people on the planet. So, this kind of thing actually fits right in.
Dane, I would also pitch in about Oklahoma City. I would encourage people who want to learn about false flag attacks is to go online, go to YouTube, and find the videos where the local newscasters there in Oklahoma City broadcast the fact that 3 more bombs were found mounted to the pylons in the basement of the building that did not go off. These were military-style bombs. And this was reported by the head of the bomb squad in Oklahoma City, who was interviewed on the local news station right there in Oklahoma City. So that information never made it to national news, and it's astonishing. So I encourage you to go on YouTube and see that.
I'll clarify again. I only used that for, and I agree with you, Russ. I perhaps should have made it even more clear. I definitely do not believe the official narrative on that story at all.
Yeah.
And I think your data is exactly right. But it's the mentality that's so shocking. And as Richard stated, the people from Iran and a lot of those Middle Eastern countries are amazingly benevolent. When you see them interviewed, they still say, we don't blame the American people. We just blame the American government. Now,
they're so much more intelligent than the average person that you meet on the street here. I mean, even I was talking to the man from Iran this morning, and even shepherds way off in the mountains in Iran that shouldn't be aware of anything have a way better grasp of what's going on in the world than people at the major universities do in the U.S.
In many ways, they do. Now, I certainly, with some of the fundamentalist ideology over there, certainly I don't agree with that. I mean, there's some pretty backwards mindset there with some of the religious radicals and their behavior with, stoning women who were raped and so forth. I mean, I certainly don't advocate that. But that being said, you take your average citizen over there and interview them, yes, they have a very good grasp of the world, and they're, again, amazingly benevolent, because if I were them and I was just invaded by America, I wouldn't feel quite so benevolent as they do. And so I hope we find hope Americans start to look for some other source of news, and I have tried to advocate for RTTV, which is really a quite good source of news at this point. But people who have chosen to entertain their delusion of what it means to be an American, or their delusion of security, that they feel their life's going to continue in the fashion it has, that delusion is not going to be much longer. The party is just about over, as it has been, and people, whether they like it or not, are going to wake up soon. Period. So, on that, Richard, I mean, let's hear from your area. Anybody you know, or Russ, are you seeing people around you, the ones that you know who are really caught in the delusion? Are you seeing any of them begin to have any inkling that there's very dark clouds on the horizon?
I am. Yeah, a lot of people that I know are beginning to feel that way. So it's, the feeling is becoming more mutual as time goes on, I believe.
How do they deal with that? Are you seeing any of them, or many of them, actually respond, actually feel any sense of responsibility toward the whole?
Not many. I'm in contact with a lot of activists who are doing a lot, so that's wonderful. The people who are not activists, who are just everyday people who are not involved and don't actively get educated, some of them are beginning to get educated about this. But unfortunately, when people first get educated about this, they're so overwhelmed they have no idea what to do. They're just kind of stifled, and many of them just prefer to put all of this out of their minds because it's just too scary for them.
It's unfortunate people respond that way, because there's a lot to be gained by staring your fears head on and not trying to run, embracing them. And I hope more do this. I hope more turn their fear to anger. This is advice I try to give anybody who's in that state, to turn your fear to anger and use that anger for fuel for the fight, so that you can more effectively engage in raising awareness. And in awareness, there's strength. So I got a pretty good echo coming back, Russ, too. Just want to let you know, so we can try to tune that out for.
Yeah, we can do that. It's coming through. Richard, if you could either mute or turn your Skype volume down, that'll cut that right out. That's where it's coming from.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, maybe you can turn your Skype volume down somewhat, and that will cut that echo, that feedback.
Yeah, I knew you would know, Russ. You have all the
Sorry.
Been doing.
Yeah, wow. Had my nose in audio all my life, so.
I figured you would know. So that's, people need to polish their philosophy at this critical time, to have a philosophy. And so many in America have been trained not to have one, other than to consume and pursue your personal pleasures. And that's not going to get us anywhere but the rest of the way off the edge of the cliff at the moment. So, yeah. Richard, your way, Richard, I mean, you seeing any really adequate response from those who have been in denial around you?
What I'm finding mostly is people have no idea what to do. And they mostly feel that the powers, the ones that are aware somewhat of what's going on, and all the different things that the U.S. government under higher direction is doing for the destruction of humanity right now, which is quite a few, they mostly don't really know what to do about it. They think it's good to tell other people, but most of the general other people they tell don't believe it. And so they're really, I think the ones who are most sincere are looking for exactly what to do in response, and most of them don't know.
Well, you know what's interesting, too, in our society, people have been trained to really be dependent. Not many stop and think about what they can do. They just, without thought, they start asking someone to tell them what to do, instead of trying to examine the situation and decide from their particular position how they might best affect the equation in the right direction. And I get this sometimes with people, certainly with geoengineering, without looking at any data, without taking any time to investigate. They send a list of questions, basically, they want me to answer. And I don't think they've stopped to consider that the data's there, you need to look at it, and that, some of us are too busy in the fight to stop and answer the individual questions of that's why we've posted the data, so they would have it. Does that make sense?
Dane, I wanted to ask you a question related to what you were saying on Iran. Do you know offhand what the status of the spraying is over Iran right now? Is it going on, and if so, how much?
I do know a bit about that. We actually sent to Iran's Minister of Security, or I can't think of what their post was, but we sent commercial copies of why in the world are they spraying. And Iran, their VP and their president, both have been on the floor of the UN stating publicly, and let's give this credit to Iran, at least they have the courage to speak out, although Armenia didn't cover it, but they've been on the floor of the UN with an empty room, because whenever Iran speaks as a very spineless sign of protest, everybody is pressured to leave the room by NATO powers. So these leaders spoke about the weather modification programs drowning out their country. So,
yeah, because my friend from Iran was just saying this morning with great concern that all of the lakes are drying up. It's just being completely destroyed for lack of water.
They're being wiped out, and this is the plan. So
now, I was wondering, again, this is a sign of great lack of aggressiveness on the part of Iran, but I assume that those planes are not operating with the complicity of the Iranian government, and if that's the case, why are they not being met with, some kind of aggressive response from Iran?
Well, this is the issue with climate change. You don't have to be directly over somebody's airspace. You just simply have to cut the water off upstream. So
okay.
Same is true with California. And this may be part of the push and pull that's going on in California right now. A lot of awareness has been raised recently in California about this issue because the drought was so unprecedented. And I mentioned I had a very high-level meeting at the Capitol about 2.5 weeks ago. And, we can't know who's pushing against who on these programs. Why did they let the high pressure drop a little bit? Although they didn't let it drop much, who's trying to appease who? The headlines would make it sound like you need an ark in California. There's so much rain falling. That is an absolute blatant, glaring lie. We had very little rainfall in Northern California, which is where the water comes from Southern California. And again, on the Weather Channel, they make it look like it's some sort of historic flooding.
I saw the massive flooding and mudslides this morning on one of my rare glances at a television, and it was showing that there was a real, serious situation with too much water right now.
There's a few areas where there's some material coming off, of course, freshly burnt hills, but it wasn't much, even though they were trying to make it seem extreme. The guy's Weather Channel meteorologist is up to his ankles in mud. Well, so what? After the kind of catastrophic burns we've seen down there, that's the best they could do. There's not much rain falling. And in Northern California, again, we were supposed to have several inches. In the last few days, we had 1 inch. And so now we're at 13 inches for the year where I live instead of, we should be at about 60 right now. and they're making it sound like, oh, big drought relief. It's absolute nonsense. So it's more efforts of mass distraction again, and American people are unfortunately a lot of them do buy it. I know people even in our area that seem to feel like, oh, good, the drought's over. Well, meantime, the lake is empty, the forest is still dead, dying, and we've had, what didn't amount to much more than a drizzle. So it's alarming that people are so easily misled. Russ, you might give the call-in number if you would.
Yeah, absolutely. For those who'd like to call in, we'd love to talk to you and get on the console here. You can call 718-717-8296. It's 718-717-8296 and chat with us. Ask us a question if you will. Please call in.
Richard and Russ, both, you've probably heard some rumor of economic collapse, maybe in the next month or something. Have you guys heard anything about that?
Not me. How about you, Richard?
Well, I've been tracing the plans, for the intentional economic collapse that I still expect to happen. But as far as, people have all through the last quite a few years have been saying it's going to be in the next month.
They have.
So I don't really pay any attention to that. I've heard it from many sources recently in the last few weeks. If it happens in the next month, it happens. But I don't think any of the people that I've heard it from really know. And the thing that I put more credibility on is that for the last 100 years, they have been setting in motion the total economic destruction of America through the imposition of the Federal Reserve and elimination of the trade tariffs and joining of the so-called free trade agreements, all of which are deadly destructive to this country. So those are evidence, just like the melting methane is enough to end the argument on the warming. The fact of the joining of the trade agreements is complete and absolute evidence of planned economic total destruction of America. It's been going on for a long time.
Yeah, isn't it interesting with the quote-unquote free trade agreements that we have more than enough data to make clear what that's all about, and the average American worker doesn't seem to be able to muster any sort of outrage toward these quote-unquote free trade agreements, which are nothing more than a gutting of what's left of any economic structure here. And common sense is missing, in all areas of life now. And anybody that still has any of it appears like some kind of genius, because the average person walking around has been trained and physically assaulted to the point where common sense is pretty much completely foreign to what people are aware of now. It is. Let's look a few headlines. While they try to tell us how wonderful the economy is, it's growing. A few headlines as of yesterday. Qantas to cut 5,000 jobs. Let's look another one. AirAsia reports loss in 2013. Thai Airlines losses, $1.2 billion. Ryanair says cross-Atlantic fare, losses. Another article, regional airlines face irreversible collapse. This is from Australia. The only thing keeping the facade of any functional economic system right now is the unknown massive quantity of printing of money out of thin air by the central banks. Yes, and how long can that last when there's no resources to back up that printing? Well, the planet still had some resources left, some fish in the sea and some forests that were still alive, and they could get away with this, but we're about at the end of that road now. So, again, what we see happening in Ukraine, Libya, Iraq, all these countries, it's all about resources. It's all about grabbing what's left of the resources. And you have the rush for resources now in the Arctic, as if, no one seems to care with the corporate industrial complex about the fact that there's fountains of methane, virtual geysers pumping into the atmosphere as we speak. They just want to get at the oil and maybe cause some more methane leaks. So it really shows a human mentality that is very, very perplexing. Russ, your thoughts?
Yeah, I totally agree. The real, we see this over and over again with civilization as we see a decline, step by step. We see people move into a mentality of selfishness where they stop thinking about the overall good, and they stop being willing to make sacrifices in their own lives for the overall good and for their children. And we're in that final stage right now. And unfortunately, this whole mentality is pushed along very, very strongly by the powers that be who want this mentality because they actually profit from it. But here we go again, unfortunately, Richard.
Yeah, I totally understand people feeling helpless and like they don't know what to do, but probably on the solution side, or at least the positive action side, because we don't know if it's too late for real solutions or not. But I was very impressed by Dane, one of your friends, who is now getting people together to not just talk about these things among themselves, which they could do indefinitely, but actually to get succinct, really well presented data such as the available videos that we have, and go face to face and meet their fake representatives in their states at least and in their local governments, and go sit in their office and hand them the stuff and talk to them about what is being done and what needs to be done. And I thought that was a really good idea because there's a tendency among people who are somewhat aware of these things to simply chat with each other and let time go by. And, if there's anything that can be done by exposing this on a highly publicized basis, in case there's anybody still, remotely receptive among the government people, I think it's a really great idea to go right into their offices and insist that they address it. And if enough people do that, all the people that are just talking about it, if they did that, it might have an effect, actually.
Well, I certainly respect and regard all those that are actually engaged in the fight. They know who they are, and again, my highest respect for them. It's all those that are sitting the bench who maybe pop their head out of the hole once a month when maybe there's a bad spray day or something. You hear from certain people, but then they're gone golfing for the next month. And
it's just too easy. It's too easy for them to talk to each other, or for us to talk to each other, and just leave it at that, because, that means that you're choosing to do nothing and just talk about it so that you feel like you did something. But this idea of, at least going and face-to-face confronting the people that are supposed to have our interests to protect, I think is a really good idea.
Here's something that people want to know what's unfolding. Here's a headline today as well. Army gives out $500,000 armored trucks for free. The U.S. Army is giving away 13,000 armored trucks worth about $500,000 each. The 20-ton MRAPs, or mine-resistant ambush-protected trucks, were built specifically to save U.S. soldiers from roadside ambushes in Iraq and Afghanistan. Now the trucks are patrolling U.S. city streets. U.S. law enforcement agencies have received the lion's share of this high-powered military surplus. 13,000 of these trucks. I mean, the militarization of law enforcement in our country continues. They're ramping up. They're preparing. And I believe, in spite of what we talked about earlier, that, yes, a lot of people have predicted economic collapse for a lot of years, and certainly no one can know the day or the hour. But I would argue that if one looks at all the data, it's got to be close. Because, if a car is going 100 miles an hour and 10 feet from impact, you can say that you can't know where all the parts are going to fly, but you can say for damn sure it's going to hit. And no amount of applying the brakes will change that. And in fact, we're hitting the accelerator, not the brakes. So I would argue we're very close, and there's more than enough red flags to point that out to anybody who has their eyes even partially open.
Dane, we have some callers if you'd like to take somebody, or unless you had something to say, Richard.
Well, yeah, I was just going to point out on that economic collapse, we have to remember, is not something that's just going to happen against all of the leaders trying to prevent it. It's something that they've actually created step by step. And as far as when it happens, even though it's hard for us to predict, not being on the inside, it's pretty easy for them to decide when they want it to actually hit as far as from their side. And they can just pull the last strings on it anytime and cause it to happen at their will. Equally, it would be something that they could start to reverse immediately if they had any interest in that. So it's not mysterious. We can see how it's being created. And as far as they're concerned, the ones ruling, they're just going to pull the last strings on it when they're ready.
I would agree that they can they can trigger it, the final step, if you will, at any point. But I would argue that there's no stopping societal collapse at this point, because the resources are literally not available in many regions around the globe already. We see resource wars happening right now. So no matter how much money they print, even if they were flying helicopters over dumping money to the public like they do to the corporations,
well, that's not a way to fix it anyway. I mean, that would be ridiculous as far as the remedy goes.
Well,
and
we
I'm
face
not
a lack of resources right now, though. I mean, we face a lack of fish in the seas. They're 95% depleted pelagic fish stocks right now. Try to get your arms around that one. So,
but I'm not saying that they have the ability to reverse all those things successfully. What I was saying is that they could show the effort in that direction anytime they wanted.
If they had any regard for the common good, which
right, and that's not happening. So it's really clear that they're the perpetrators.
Yeah, if we were, true geoengineering would be to start campaigns to plant trees all over the globe. I mean, what a perfect mechanism for restoring climate stability is to have.
Well, that's right. I mean, there's a lot of things like that could be done instantly, because, instead of using whatever borrowed money they have to just kill more people and invade more countries, they could plant a lot of trees, make sure that, people's lives started at least having a chance to improve right away. And what I was saying specifically is that with regard to the economy, they could immediately withdraw from all of these deadly destructive organizations that the U.S. is a member of now, from the UN all the way down through the free trade agreements. The WTO, the Federal Reserve, and the IRS could be disbanded today. I mean, and those things would immediately start to give a chance, just like the Earth responding in nature, it would give a chance for the economy of a free market that's not government controlled to bring back prosperity, and they're not trying to do that.
It would be a step in the right direction, but I would argue, again, that society as we have known it is totally unsustainable. And I know you're saying the same thing in that regard, but with the amount of population that's here and the sort of resource consumption that's occurred, we've chewed up millions of years of resources in several hundred years. So it's just something that couldn't have been sustained. But hey, Russ, let's get to that calls real quick.
Hey, you got it real quick. If anybody wants to call in, we do have a few slots open. Call 718-717-8296. It's 718-717-8296. We do have some slots open for callers, so please call in. Caller, we have a caller with us. It's coming up as an unknown phone number, but you called in about 10 minutes ago. Let's see if we can hear your audio. Are you with us?
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, everybody. This is Elizabeth from New Jersey. How are you?
Good to have you, Elizabeth.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you guys so much for everything that you do. Oh my gosh, I've learned a lot, but I did want to point out that we're really trying very hard all over to unite and to come together with raising awareness. And there are people that are really working very, very hard, like you guys know. And then there's those ones that just complain and say, why bother? You can't stop the world, or you're not going to make a difference. Well, guess what? That's how we got into this position in the first place. By, not saying anything and not speaking up and not realizing what's going on. So I feel that we will succeed. I know that we've been trying to set up meetings face to face with our congressional leaders, and we're continuing to work on that. It's been very difficult to get them to answer us. We've been working on it nonstop for the last 3 months, and we got one meeting out of, I don't know how many, 22 letters that went out. But, the ironic thing was, on our way to the meeting to meet one of our congressional leaders, on the radio station, the local radio station, they happened to be talking about geoengineering. And the radio host was mentioning how if they stopped the program, how bad it would be worse, and it would spiral out of control. So of course I called in because I couldn't listen to that anymore. And I basically explained to the host that the funny thing is, who wrote the article? The same folks who are spraying us and don't want to admit to it are the ones that are writing this article. Corrupt corporation, government, military involvement is writing if they stop the program. They don't admit to it, but they say if they stop it, it'll spiral out of control. It's like all controlled media crap. So I basically told him that, and he said, you know, you're right. He's like, I wouldn't trust the media, definitely, or the government. We know how corrupt it could be. And it's true. And to let people just continue to go on thinking that everything's okay that they watch on TV, it's, you know, people will always say, well, how come it's not on the news? And I explain this all the time. But my bottom line here is, and we have to come together with this, is if everybody worked this hard to set up a meeting with their congressional leaders, we would definitely be in a much better position. And the more people that wake up and realize that you need to speak up, you can't just have the attitude, why bother? It's not the right attitude to have.
It takes all of us, right?
Yeah, and basically the more people that come forward and they see the numbers of people, they are going to have to be forced to do something about it at some point.
Well, yeah, we're not going to be able to, they won't be able to sit the bench much longer. I agree with you on that. And in regard to, it's called double collapse scenario when you halt the climate modification programs. And there's two sides to that coin. Yes, it has to happen. It must be allowed to happen. In regard to some of what they're alluding to, and again, this is not an excuse to keep the climate programs going. They must stop, and the planet must be allowed to respond. But there will be massive cyclonic rotations that will hit. If there was no weather modification at all, there would be much more powerful cyclonic rotations. Those would devastate coastal areas, but that has to happen. It must be allowed to happen. That's the planet trying to cool itself. And by stopping the planet's natural hydrological cycle and natural response mechanisms, they are simply pounding the nails into all of our coffins overall. Isn't it better to have a planet that supports life and have some major coastal problems, flooding issues, and you know, sea level rises that are going to be cataclysmic around the globe? But even with that, it's going to happen anyway. Why poison everything in the process? And inevitably speed up the whole process or eliminate any chance we have of the planet responding on its own. So, you know, in some regard, to look at the whole picture, I just don't I don't want people to think if they simply stop geoengineering, all our climate problems are over. They are not over. It's just simply a process that has to happen. It has to be allowed to happen. There would be probably much more catastrophic flooding around the globe without the aerosolization. The aerosolization is reducing the hydrological cycle. But again, the flooding must be allowed to happen. That's the planet's response mechanism. So again, I just try to have a balanced presentation to people. Yes, I fully agree that we must focus on stopping these programs cold in their tracks, period. But just so people don't think that that all our climate problems are over once they're stopped. We still have unimaginable challenges ahead of us. There's no question about that.
Absolutely. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Okay. She's, you know, I know Elizabeth from New Jersey, and her and Jan and a couple others there have been extremely assertive in getting things done and having very productive conferences. And if everybody was as active as they are, you know, we would be a lot further into the cycle. But, you know, again, given what I said, I still want to make clear, though, that my only focus, all of our focus, should be to stop these programs cold, period. And that's I believe, of all the things humanity faces, that's the single greatest step we can take in the right direction, is to stop the climate engineering, period. Any more calls, Russ?
Dane, I think one of the most important things, tell me what you think about this, is to get as many people involved as possible. And I'd like to share with the people listening that I think one of the most effective ways to do that is to let people know how this affects your health. I have seen an incredible increase in heart attacks, strokes, aneurysms, and cancer, which all can be directly medically linked to breathing these types of aerosols. And I could go into the details. I won't bore everybody with the medical details of how this stuff does this. But stroke, do you know anybody who has strokes, aneurysm, cancer,
yes,
or heart attacks? I would tell people, well, guess what? Breathing aerosols not only causes those things and many other things, but also shortens your lifespan. We scientifically know that. It's undisputed. The smaller the particle, the more numerous the particle, the shorter your lifespan. So we need to get people involved by making them understand that this directly affects them personally.
Yeah, certainly nobody argues that, and that's the strongest common ground we have in this fight. That, and Richard's brought this up many times too. That nobody on any side of the fence would argue that. And the only reason I brought up the other point I did with Elizabeth is because if the message with so many in academia, and we've talked about how conditioned they are, but if in presenting a message to them that we believe the only problem with the climate is the aerosol operations, then they tend to shut up and clam up, and because they know that there's other problems as well, and they tend to discount all their information, and I don't want that to happen either. We simply need to present the message that, yes, we have problems with the climate, but the climate engineering is making those problems exponentially worse, not better, and that's the message. So anyway, hopefully that'll give us common ground to stand on, but on the health issues, I agree, Russ, everybody's on the same page.
Yeah, absolutely. Richard, I know you've got a lot of background in this area. I mean, you know what aluminum does and barium does to people, right?
Yeah, I approach these things from the point of view of healing, and there's, two classes of patients. Well, there's a lot of classes of patients involved in this particular assault. One is, the planet and the climate systems, and every form of life in the biosphere is being assaulted with these particles. We know there's much more than aluminum, but if we just say aluminum, as an example, it's not the only reason people are getting sick, but it's certainly a huge contributor. And it's not being done by accident. I don't think there's any possibility that it's an unintended consequence. I think the people who are doing this from the top, which is not the geoengineers, I think they're just spokesmen. People at the top are quite clever, and they know this very well. So one thing that comes to my mind is that what would happen if a number of so-called representatives were actually pressured into even acknowledging the problem exists, which they don't now? What would be the response of those really controlling these programs? Because I think they want the results they're getting. And if they have some static from people around the country, I think, like we were talking about earlier, their response would not be logical, reasonable conversation about it, or let's vote or something like that, unless they control all the votes themselves. I think their response would be something along the line of other types of false flags, or using the heavy equipment they've handed out to the police, things like that. And I agree to some extent with the people that say we need more plans of exactly what to do, because if they say, no, we're not going to stop, then what's the best response? And I don't know the answer to that, but I think we need to look at it. They're not just we can't just assume they're going to say, oh, the representative said it, maybe we should stop all these programs. They're not going to do that.
No, I completely agree with you on that. And that's why, again, I would argue with the numbers we have right now, we need to increase our army, if you will, our level of awareness. So if we could reach that critical mass, again, we're back to the point we made again and again, that if those in the military realized exactly what they are a part of, their families realized, and I've given examples of somebody I know whose brother is probably a part of these programs, and there's what amounts to a civil war in that household. If we brought it to that level, that would, I believe, render those in power unable to continue carrying out these programs.
I think it's a really good point that the rulers are not going to become benevolent. That's not going to happen. But if you take away their workers, which are not, completely given, they don't in most cases realize what they're doing. And if you get large numbers of them to stop facilitating the plans of their bosses, that could potentially really change things.
Yeah, that's I believe our only chance, because it's good to raise awareness with the legislators and so forth. And again, I think that, for example, what Elizabeth is doing, they're letting the legislators know that we know that they know. And I think some of them start to become fearful of being held responsible for not doing anything. So there may be, something to be gained from that. In the meantime, we need to wake up the masses, period. We need to wake up the masses, and that's everybody's responsibility, as Elizabeth so correctly said, everybody's responsibility to get up and help. And if people did as much as, for example, Elizabeth and Jan are doing, then we would have a different equation right now.
Yeah, which one of the What in the World Are They Spraying movies was showing actual footage of the so-called representatives running into hallways and doorways in any way they could physically escape from being asked these questions. They know all about it, most of them.
That was the first film.
Yeah, first movie.
What in the world? And having been in Barbara Boxer's office myself, I mean, it's just simply an exercise in futility. I mean, they just try to pass the buck, and you need to check with your local people. They send you back here, and it's just musical chairs. It's a joke. But at the same time, again, the type of meeting that I know just happened with Elizabeth. I was part of that conference call, and that representative certainly knows that we know that he knows. And I think that as that increases, that'll make it more likely that some of these people are just out of concern for their own welfare and being held responsible for these programs. I think a few of them might find their spine.
Dane.
Yeah, I'm also really interested, as we talked a little earlier, maybe this week, if I remember right, in is there any possibility of using common law actions and enforcement that goes with it that's being tried on some big issues right now? Could we start holding representatives and others personally responsible for, crimes against humanity for going along with this sort of thing? Because if they started worrying about losing their personal property or going to prison, they might suddenly find that they're really interested.
Well, I think there's some wheels turning in that direction. I got an email this morning that was sort of in that category, and I haven't given anything I can post yet, but hopefully we will have something we can post soon that would shine the light on who's moving the ball in that arena. So, and in the meantime, I think in general we are gaining ground rapidly overall with awareness. I mean, I think it's picking up much faster than we realize in much more arenas than we realize. So everybody's efforts matter, and right now we're in the stretch. We are truly in the stretch. We have to keep our stride, have to keep our pace, and we're trying to distribute flyers with universities. I have another 10,000 flyers ordered now that we're supplying to people that are going to distribute to 4 major universities, trying to start spot fires there. So people can all think assertively, constructively as to how you can move the ball forward every day.
Dane,
who haven't you talked to?
Dane, a couple questions for you from the chat room real quick. I know we've only got about 3 minutes left. And I want to just inject this is that what people I'd like people to realize is that your representatives serve those whom they fear. If they fear their bosses, they will serve them. If they fear the public, they will serve them. So when the numbers become large enough in the public, they will fear the public and begin to serve the public. Dan is in the chat room asking me, can you ask Dane if he's had an update on what is in the nucleating chemicals, and also is the reason why we on the East Coast are getting precipitation in the form of rain and snow and so few others worldwide? Is this an unintended consequence or planned?
I think it's part of the plan. Two parts of that question. I just got another lab test back that was loaded with copper in the snow sample. So we know now aluminum, barium, copper, chloride, but quite high levels of copper. Copper is a nucleating agent as well.
Dane, I want to quickly put in here that too much copper is connected with things like insanity. Might be important. Yeah. Might be important.
Lots of fallout. Yeah. So I mean, there's copper there now. We know for sure. As far as the East Coast precipitation, yes, I think part of what they're trying to do in the Arctic is why the East Coast gets so much precipitation. They create the headlines and they push that moisture up, and they're trying to nucleate it to form a cap on the methane that's expelling from the Laptev Sea. So very complex scenario, but likely connected to the overall activities that's happening there too. Yeah.
So glad you brought up copper. I want to tell everybody I just posted in the forum a link. There's a type of chemtrail I call the metallic chemical, and it started having a very strong copper taste in the last year or so to it, added to that particular type, and it has now become the most common type that is sprayed. So if you're in the chat room, check out that link about the copper taste that those who are sensitive can smell. Well, that's it for today. This is Russ Tanner on behalf of Dane Wigington and Richard Sachs. This is GeoEngineering Watch Radio. Join us every Saturday at 12 noon Pacific Time, 3 p.m. Eastern Time, right here on UCY.TV. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye. Get involved.